First of all, did we cheat? A little bit. And how on earth did that happen? If you'll remember, in the first video, I mentioned that I had a project for a later video that I was allowing myself to purchase a few things for. We decided we would go ahead and get our membership at Sam's for when I finish with the challenge and I start doing my monthly bulk shopping. So we went ahead and got the membership signed up, ready to go, and decided while we were there, we would just check everything out. Just gonna look. We're just gonna look. We're just gonna look. I bought some lemons. I was allowed to buy citrus. We bought some orange juice, technically citrus. And we made another little purchase. As you watch the video, see if you can spot what we cheated on. I'll let you know in the end, but I think it'll speak for itself. And I have no regrets. My name's Loanna, and this is a little bit of homestead.
Thank goodness my chickens are finally laying again. And if you are not familiar with the challenge I'm speaking of, Three Rivers Challenge is a pantry challenge where we eat from our pantry and try to stay out of the grocery store as much as possible. And this week I was trying to use up last week's bread, so I decided on some French toast. On this evening, I'm making some meatballs in a mushroom gravy. This is some leftover stuffing mix, some Italian herbs, some Worcestershire sauce, and a couple eggs. And I just get it mixed up real good. So I added some salt and pepper. And then you start forming your meatballs. And I fry them up just enough to brown on each side. Then I remove them from the pan and I add the onions into the remaining fats and drippings for added flavor. I saute them a little bit. Then I add a little bit of butter. We're going to make our gravy here. You add a little bit of flour and you stir this around real good till it gets incorporated and you brown it a little for added flavor. You just keep stirring it so you don't burn it. This is some homemade beef broth that I made. That's why it's clumpy. And a handful of dehydrated mushrooms that were hanging out in the pantry. Some salt and pepper. After it's simmered a while, we're adding the meatballs back in to the sauce. And we're going to cover it and let it simmer for a while until the meatballs are cooked completely through. And I served it over some macaroni. I tried a few TikTok hacks that I've seen in this video. I have another one later. This is the avocado hack where they put the avocado in water and store it in the fridge to keep it fresh longer. This is a 3-week-old since I bought it and put it in there. Avocado. There's not even any black stuff along the skin that's gross. And it was firm, fresh, tasted good. And this one was 4 weeks old. No joke. 1 month in my fridge. And it was perfect. When it started snowing here in East Tennessee, we ended up getting about 8 inches. The boys were really enjoying the snow. And it made me want to make a pot of soup. Topped with snowflakes. So I made some potato soup with some homemade bread. I'm trying out my same-day sourdough recipe for some focaccia. I just let it rise in my iron skillet and I topped it with some olive oil and everyday bagel seasoning and poked it down. My husband is all about this seasoning right now. He can't get enough of it. And it turned out great. It's not really holy like typical focaccia, but it was very good. Very, very good. I'll link this description below, but this is my version of a TikTok pasta. I can a homemade bruschetta with my cherry tomatoes. It has basil, garlic, and a champagne vinegar, which gives it a little sweetness. I sauteed out some of the liquid, and I placed some feta cheese in the middle and drizzled with some olive oil, and I baked that. And then you just mix everything together. Makes a creamy pasta. And I added in my angel hair. And I had some basil just growing in some water on my counter. I like to find ways to preserve basil, and I have a video I'll link to this. But that's just some fresh basil, some of the focaccia, and it was delicious as well. Smoke some meat. I have 2 chuck roasts here, and I've made a dry rub of 1 tablespoon coarse sea salt, 2 tablespoons coarse black pepper, 3/4 tablespoons celery seed, and 1 tablespoon of finely ground coffee. You just rub everything real good. It'll cover all sides. I've secured in these little floppy pieces so that it would cook more evenly. My husband is the meat smoker in the family, but I've been having him teach me. So we're going to insert these probes way into the center of the meat so we can keep an eye on the internal temps. We have the temperature of the smoker set to 225, and it is that hot now. Before we place them in there, we're going to place them in quickly so we don't let out much of the heat. And then we're just going to sit back and monitor these until the internal temps reach 160 degrees. All right, we are there at 160 degrees. We're going to take them off. We're going to take them inside, and we are going to wrap them in butcher paper real tightly so that that will seal in the juices. You just fold these down, as you can see, and you do it tightly. You seam that real tight, and then tuck those ends under. And we're going to stick them back on the grill. And we're going to put the probes back into it so we can keep an eye on that meat. And we're going to get that up to 195 to 198 degrees. And a few hours later, we take them off, and we're going to put them in the oven at 150 degrees and let it rest for an hour. It's rested for the hour in the oven at 150 degrees. We're going to unwrap these, and by now they're not too hot to mess with. And we're going to drain off the oils and the drippings that were in that paper and save that into a bowl, and we're going to pour it back over this after we put it in another container. I'm going to slice this up. You can see that smoke ring, that red part around the outer edges. And this has that nice bark left on it from the seasonings that we put on. It stays a little crunchy, but everything's still really moist. So we cut a little and snack a little, cut a little and snack a little. We ate one night with some sweet potatoes and some green beans. I put a little bit of it in with his breakfast that he takes for work each day. And towards the end of the week, we ate it another way. It's so good. And this is just chuck roast, and it tastes just like having a nice brisket.
Challenge number 1, it's easy to get in a rut trying to come up with something interesting for dinner, especially when you're trying to work from just what you already have. So I hit up YouTube and got the creative juices flowing, and the past 2 nights' meals have been phenomenal. So I'll link those below, and you can try those out.
Baked some spaghetti squash that I grew from my garden. And then we're going to make a meat sauce with some ground venison. I have some leftover pizza sauce, a marinara sauce I made, and I did not use those diced tomatoes. And then I have some garlic, Brussels sprouts, and onions. And then for the topping, we're going to take some sourdough starter, 3 eggs, and I've used some Italian seasoning here, but you could change that up and make it so many different ways. You could leave no seasoning. You could make some sage and make sort of a chicken pot pie. The possibilities are endless. A little bit of butter and baking powder, and you mix that up, and I set it aside. And then in the same skillet, if I hadn't used spaghetti squash, we could have done this completely in one skillet. You could also use some pasta here if you didn't want to use spaghetti squash. Like I said, you could make this to suit your personal needs. So easy. Just going to mix all that up just a little bit, and I added a little bit of cheese and stirred that around so that it would kind of bind everything together real good. She didn't call for that in her recipe, but like I said, you can make that your own. Just pour the topping on, spread it out real even, and then you top it with a little more cheese. Cheesy. This was delicious. Like I said, I've made this many different ways, but this, I think, was one of the best. Everybody enjoyed it. My daughter came over and ate. And she usually wouldn't go for the spaghetti squash. But this camouflaged it real good, so your kids would probably eat it, not even know what they had. Next is a beefy enchilada. This is some beef broth that I made, and it's a little clumpy. That'll dissolve as it warms up. Some tomato paste, some seasonings of chili powder, smoked paprika, and some cayenne. You're going to mix that together real well. And I apologize, but for some reason I did not get the video of where I was making the meat sauce, and this is the part that makes it a gravy, so you'll have to check that out in the video. But when the meat sauce is done, you put half of the sauce in the bottom of your pan. Now, she used a white corn tortilla that she fried up that was probably better, but this is what I had in my fridge. And this is just some different cheddar, I think a Monterey Jack, and some onion rolled up in each one. And then you're going to top it all off with the rest of that meat sauce or gravy. It was fabulous. It really was. So much better than any enchilada sauce I've ever tasted or made or had. And we're going to cover that with some cheese and bake it. And while that bakes, I'm going to make a sort of Spanish rice. This is the same pan that I made that gravy in. I'm going to saute my onions in there and get some of those goodies. Added those diced tomatoes from that previous recipe. And this is some prepackaged farro. I'm not even sure what kind of grain that is. I've never had it, but it's rice-like. So I used that up. Those were out of date. They were still good, but I used them up. I just sauteed those liquids down, added some seasonings, and it was delicious. So let's see what this stuff tastes like.
Okay, it was super easy to make. Now let's see how it tastes. Wow. So good. And this Spanish rice, delicious. So good. Challenge number 2 has been we are eating too good, and I'm going to have to lighten things up in weeks 5 and 6, but don't worry, it won't be nothing too crazy.
In case you didn't guess, our cheat meal was the smoked chuck roast. Do you think it was a cheat, and do you think it was worth it? I do.